We were talking about fear and hate, and basically this is all the Republicans have to sell these days. On the line with us is an expert on how the brain works and how these things work, Dr. Justin Frank. How does fear work? How is it that politicians manipulate us with fear?
Well, fear, there's an article actually just now in the New York Times today or yesterday about the power of fear, how it affects the amygdala, which is the central part of the brain, where it activates people into feeling that they're not only threatened, but they feel an impulse to act and become violent.
Right.
And fear is a fundamental emotion that babies have. They have what's called night terrors when they're 2. They have
Sir, could you pardon the interruption, could you move the phone just a little closer to your mouth? It's a little hard to hear. So if you could just,
how's that?
It's better.
Better?
Yeah, that's much better. Okay, continue, please.
Okay. The issue about fear is that little babies have fear. They have stranger anxiety when they're 8 months old. They're very frightened of people who don't look like their mother or their father. So, pardon me. So fear is very much about the other. It's about someone who doesn't reflect their own face and their own image.
Right.
So fear is very much based on seeing someone who doesn't look like their mother or father when they're very little. And that's called stranger anxiety when they're about 8 months old. When the baby is about 2, they have what's called night terrors that everybody who's had small children is familiar with, where you have to go into the room and turn on the light to scare the demons away and reassure the child. I think that one of the things that's important about night terrors is that we all have had that, at least most of us, in our own experience. And so when Donald Trump stokes fear about the Mexican immigrants, fear about Muslims, fear about the news media, all of those things tap into those primitive feelings that are stored deep in the unconscious, deep in the brain, and they activate a very primitive part of the self. And what happens is there is a feeling at that time that words don't work, that there is no way to contain the fear. The goal in development is to be able to use words and put them in place so they can contain the fear. And I think that's one of the most important things that happens developmentally, is where you can use your words, as they say, so you don't have to express your fear physically, violently, externalize it. And one of the things that I wrote in my book, there's a chapter entitled, by the way, I love your idea about doing the cover search. I have this cover here, which is actually a pretty cool cover.
It is, yeah, for Trump on the couch.
Yeah, it's done by the guy from the New Yorker, Barry Blitt.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a chapter in there on language. And one of the things that's very clear about Donald Trump is that he has not been able to use language in the way that most of us can. And that is that as a little kid, he was very anxious, had trouble learning. And if you don't read and you can't learn, you really are much less able to contain fear. You can only use certain primitive coping mechanisms and defenses. And his had to do with being violent, making attacks, hitting out. He was always in trouble at school. And so he never really learned how to use words and language as containers to help him think. And now we see the results of this in his presidency.
Now, he went to college, more or less the same time I did. He's I think 5, 6 years older than I am. And I actually had a friend at MSU who was openly running a business selling term papers and even, essays for tests and things to students. That was an era when, and even in the elite universities, it was possible, if you were wealthy enough and you could buy these things, to literally never write a paper and still get a degree. Are you suggesting that perhaps the reason Donald Trump refuses to take the written CIA briefings is because he just can't read?
Yeah, he cannot read, and that's why he cannot take them. also.
But he can read a teleprompter. I mean, is it? He can read the sort of. I mean, he reads it badly, but he
can read. He can read. It's big print, and he's standing up and he's moving around with a teleprompter. People with a certain kind of ADD are unable to sit still enough to read. They're very agitated. They're extremely impatient. So it's a combination of factors. It's not only the neurological wiring that makes it hard to read, which is part of it, but it's also the neurological wiring that makes a person impatient, unable to sit still, and very fidgety.
Right.
And I think that that's a huge part of it. In fact, I realized in the last week or two that I should never have named my book Trump on the Couch, because he would be too fidgety to ever get on the couch.
Right.
He couldn't actually lie down.
Right. So the question that we're all confronted with, we're talking with Dr. Justin Frank, his latest book, Trump on the Couch, clinical professor of and psychoanalyst of psychiatry.
Whatever,
at George Washington University. So the question for all of us, and the question that I put out to my listeners this morning, and we'll be taking calls on when you and I are done here, is as a nation and as individuals, and frankly, for the Democrats as a party and as politicians, how do you best respond to a politician who is using fear as their principal tool? I mean, it worked really well for George Herbert Walker Bush. The Willie Horton ads got him elected. It worked really well for George W. Bush. I just retweeted a clip from the 2004 Republican convention where the words 9/11 were repeated and terrorism were repeated like dozens and dozens of times by every single speaker. Laura Bush, George Bush, right. Dick Cheney. It was all fear. We were sold fear by both Bushes, and it worked for both Bushes. And it's working for Trump. What do we do? How do we appropriately respond to this?
Well, the question is who the we is, first of all.
Right.
What happens is that people need to find somebody, and we only have about 4 days, who can talk like Franklin Roosevelt. He calmed the nation. We were terrified that we were going to lose the war in Germany. We were terrified about the Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor. The nation was terrified, and Roosevelt had already started in 1933, way before those wars, with saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But he said it every week, a different version of it on the radio. The other thing he said was he defined fear in the second sentence of that inauguration speech when he called fear nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
I remember.
That is what's happening. People are paralyzed by their fear, and fear paralyzes people to take chances of talking about anything that might disrupt the status quo, that might disrupt Donald Trump, that might confront the Republicans. People are afraid to take risks, and that is the purpose of fear. It paralyzes people.
Now, George Lakoff is suggesting that every time the media parrots something that Donald Trump says, even when they do so in order to say, can you believe this latest absurd lie from Donald Trump? Here's his lie. That, it's like saying, don't think about an elephant. Immediately an elephant pops into mind. That even when they're rebutting his lies, they're actually amplifying them. And his suggestion was that the big newspapers and the media should have a little section, like on the page with the astrology and the cartoons, that is like, Donald Trump's statements for the day, a little box, and they just, they do their reporting in that, and that the news media should just handle it as, well, here's the latest craziness out of the White House, quack, 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 and not do big panels and have long conversations and dig into it and make it break it. Is that the best way to do it?
Right. Yeah, the best way to do it. There's two parts to that. What Lakoff said is very important. That is that just by repeating it, you're reminding people of it. And one of the things about that, and Lakoff learned that probably from George M. Cohan during World War I, who said, quote, I measure my publicity in inches. He did not really care about who said what about him as long as he was in the press.
Well, that was P.T. Barnum. Trump said that his favorite author was P.T. Barnum, and P.T. Barnum said, I don't care what you say about me, just spell my name right.
Now we can go, that's right, we can go back to that one. So the point is that that people remember Trump he has figured out how to get his name everywhere. It's all over the country. It's all over the world in his towers. And so people are very much aware of it. But the second reason is a psychoanalytic one, a psychological one, to not repeat all the things. And that is that by not paying attention to him, it will make him more anxious. It will make him less effective as a speaker and as a dangerous person. Ignoring somebody like that is very important.
So you think his rallies are like a form of therapy for him?
Yeah, his rallies are a form. They are his therapy. There are two forms of therapy. One is the rallies, and the other is getting into arguments with people and mocking them like Pocahontas or various other things that he says. I thought that Gillum, the guy who's running for governor in Florida, has said it the best. He always quotes his grandmother, but I feel he's the one who has said all these things. He said that I will not wrestle with a pig because you get dirty. But more than that, the pig likes it.
Right.
I really think that he has refused to engage with Trump or DeSantis on these issues because it really never works to the advantage. What Trump is also, and Reagan did this too, by the way, is a kind of what we call a narcissistic fighter. He's a person who fights using put down, never about content, never about policy. So even the people who are fact-checking in the media, people who are calling out Trump about his lies, is meaningless. All it does is reinforce, like Lakoff said, reinforce his name over and over again.
And they were, and back in the 80s,
it makes him feel better.
Yeah, and back in the 80s, they were constantly fact-checking Reagan. I actually subscribed to a newsletter back then about Reagan's lies, and it later became one about Dan Quayle. And
it never helped. It never helped. I mean, when Reagan was in that debate with Mondale, and Mondale made a really brilliant point in '84, Reagan just looked at the camera and he said, "That's pretty good for a younger man."
Right.
That was the end of it.
Yeah.
And look at what happened with the New York Times thing that they did 2 years of research about Trump's father, about the entire criminal family, documented, detailed. They even printed it twice in a week. Dismissed in one word by Trump, and they just stopped.
Right.
The reporters stopped.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Dr. Justin Frank, his new book, Trump on the Couch. Dr. Frank, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you.
It's always great talking with you. It's always informative talking with you.
I love it.
Thank you, sir.
I love it.
Thank you, sir. Check and the book again, Trump on the Couch. You can tweet him at Justin Frank MD, and the website is ObamaOnTheCouch.com. His most recent.